The howling wind carried screams of terror across the snow-capped mountains as the Butterfield Overland Mail stagecoach careened off the treacherous mountain pass, sending Lydia Crawford plummeting into the ravine below while the remaining passengers watched in horror, unable to help as the driver fought desperately to control the panic-stricken horses. Isaac Turner had been tracking the stagecoach's path from a distance, his keen eyes spotting the disaster unfold from his position on the ridge. The seasoned cowboy didn't hesitate. There was someone down there who needed help, and every second counted in the brutal winter conditions of the Sierra Nevada mountains. The year was 1869, and survival in these mountains during winter was nearly impossible without shelter. Isaac guided his horse as close to the edge as he dared before dismounting. The animal snorted nervously as Isaac secured him to a sturdy pine tree. "Easy, Thunder," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "I'll be back." He grabbed his rope, canteen, and blanket from his saddlebag, knowing full well that whoever fell would need immediate warmth if they were still alive. The cowboy peered over the edge, squinting through the blowing snow. The ravine wasn't a straight drop. It sloped steeply with jagged rocks and fallen trees, creating a treacherous path. In the growing twilight, he could make out something dark against the white snow about 50 feet down. He secured his rope to a sturdy tree and began his descent. Isaac's boots slipped on the icy surface as he carefully made his way down. His hands, protected only by worn leather gloves, grew numb as he gripped the rope. The biting cold penetrated his wool coat, but the exertion of the climb kept his blood flowing. 20 minutes of careful descent brought him to a small ledge where a crumpled form lay half buried in snow. "Hello," he called out, approaching cautiously. "Can you hear me?" As he brushed away the snow, Isaac revealed the face of a young woman, her skin pale against her dark hair. Blood stained the snow beneath her head. For a moment he feared he was too late, but then he saw a small cloud of breath escape her lips. "Thank God," he whispered, immediately checking for broken bones. The woman moaned softly as his hands gently probed her limbs. Nothing seemed broken, but he couldn't be certain. The head wound worried him most. "Madam, can you open your eyes?" Isaac asked, his voice raised to carry over the howling wind. Lydia's eyelids fluttered, and she gasped in pain as consciousness returned. The world spun around her, and a man's face, a stranger's face, hovered above her. Fear shot through her body. "Don't be afraid," Isaac said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "I'm here to help. The stagecoach crashed. You were thrown." Lydia tried to process his words through the fog of pain. "The stagecoach," she repeated, fragments of memory returning. The terrified horses, the driver shouting, the sickening sensation of falling through air. "Yes, madam. I'm Isaac Turner. I need to get you somewhere warm. Night's coming and another storm with it." Lydia attempted to sit up but fell back with a cry of pain. "I can't. My head." "Don't move," Isaac instructed firmly. "I'll carry you. My cabin's not far from here." Isaac carefully wrapped his blanket around Lydia before gently lifting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, though her sodden clothes added weight. Her head lolled against his chest as he secured her with one arm, using the other to grip the rope for their ascent. The climb up was far harder than the descent. Each step required careful placement, and the added weight of the woman tested his strength. The wind had picked up, blowing snow into his eyes and making the rope slippery. Several times his foot slid, causing Lydia to whimper in pain as he jostled her. "Almost there," he encouraged, though she seemed barely conscious. When they finally reached the top, Isaac was breathing heavily, his muscles burning with exertion. Thunder nickered nervously as the wind gusted around them. "Good boy," Isaac murmured, approaching his horse. Now came the challenge of mounting while holding Lydia. With careful maneuvering, he managed to drape her across the saddle before pulling himself up behind her. He cradled her against his chest with one arm while taking the reins with his free hand. "Hold on, madam," he said, turning Thunder toward his cabin 5 miles distant. "Just hold on." Lydia drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. The motion of the horse sent waves of pain through her head, but the warmth of the man behind her kept the worst of the cold at bay. She couldn't remember why she had been on the stagecoach or where she had been headed. All she knew was pain and cold and the strong arms that held her secure. Isaac's cabin appeared as a dark shadow against the whiteness of the landscape. Built into the side of a small hill for protection from the elements, it was modest but sturdy. A small barn stood nearby where he kept Thunder and his pack mule during the harsh winter months. He dismounted carefully, holding Lydia close as he carried her to the cabin door. Inside, embers still glowed in the fireplace from the morning's fire. He laid Lydia on his bed little more than a wooden frame with a straw mattress covered in furs and quickly built up the fire. As warmth began to fill the one-room cabin, Isaac turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. Her clothes were soaked through and her skin felt ice-cold to the touch. He knew she needed to be warmed up quickly, but propriety gave him pause. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, gently patting her cheek. "Your clothes are wet. You need to get into something dry." Lydia's eyes opened slightly. "Cold," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I know. I need to help you change. I have some clothes that might fit you." Isaac moved to a wooden trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a flannel shirt and wool trousers. They would be too large for her, but they were dry. He helped her sit up, supporting her weight as he removed her sodden cloak. Her dress beneath was equally wet. Isaac averted his eyes as much as possible while helping her out of the heavy garment. Her chemise and petticoats were also damp, but he couldn't bring himself to remove those. "Can you manage the rest?" he asked, handing her the shirt. Lydia nodded weakly, and Isaac turned his back to give her privacy, busying himself with heating water for tea. Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric as she struggled to change. "I'm decent," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Isaac turned to find her dressed in his shirt, which hung to her knees. Her wet clothes lay in a heap beside the bed. Her face was alarmingly pale except for a flush of fever on her cheeks, and blood had matted in her dark hair. "Let me see that head wound," he said, approaching with a basin of warm water and a clean cloth. He gently parted her hair to reveal a nasty gash. "It needs cleaning." Lydia winced as he dabbed at the wound. "Who are you?" she asked, her eyes clearer now as she studied his face. "Where am I?" "Isaac Turner, madam. You're in my cabin about 10 miles east of Keeler, California. You were on the Butterfield stage when it went off the pass. I saw it happen and climbed down to get you." "Keeler," she repeated, frowning as though trying to recall something important. "Yes, I was heading to Keeler, my uncle." Her eyes widened suddenly. "My belongings, my trunk was on the coach." "We can worry about that later," Isaac said firmly. "Right now you need rest. What's your name?" "Lydia Crawford." She winced as he found a particularly tender spot on her scalp. "Well, Miss Crawford, you're lucky to be alive. That's quite a fall you took. The others." The driver and the other passengers. Isaac's expression grew somber. The coach continued on. "I couldn't see clearly through the snow, but it looked like the driver got it under control further down the pass. They probably think you're dead." Lydia closed her eyes, absorbing this information. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Turner." "Isaac, please," he said, finishing with her wound and moving to prepare a cup of tea with honey. "Here, drink this. It'll help with the cold." Lydia accepted the cup gratefully, her hand still trembling. As she sipped the sweet liquid, she studied her rescuer more carefully. Isaac Turner appeared to be in his early 30s, with weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun. His dark hair was flecked with silver at the temples, and his eyes were a striking blue against his tanned face. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. "Are you a rancher?" she asked. Isaac smiled slightly. "Of a sort. I have a small spread about a day's ride from here. This is my hunting cabin. I come up here in winter for trapping." He nodded toward the far wall where several animal pelts hung. "It's not much, but it's warm." "It's wonderful," Lydia said sincerely, the tea warming her from within as the fire warmed her from without. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." "No need to think about that now," Isaac replied, moving to check on the fire. "You should rest. That head wound needs time to heal." Lydia's eyelids grew heavy as exhaustion overtook her. She wanted to ask more questions about how long she would be here, about how she would get to Keeler, about what would happen next, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. Isaac watched as she drifted off, her breathing becoming deep and regular. He gently covered her with furs before settling into a chair beside the fire. The storm was picking up outside, snow and wind battering the small cabin. They wouldn't be going anywhere for at least a few days. He studied the sleeping woman, wondering what her story was. She spoke like an educated Easterner, and her clothes, though now ruined, had been of good quality. What business did she have in a rough mining town like Keeler? And what would he do with her once the storm passed? Isaac sighed and leaned back in his chair. Those were questions for another day. For now, they were both safe and warm, and that was enough. Morning came with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the fresh snow. Isaac had slept poorly in the chair, rising several times during the night to check on Lydia and add wood to the fire. He stretched his stiff muscles as he moved quietly about the cabin, preparing coffee and a simple breakfast of salt pork and cornmeal mush. The smell of food roused Lydia from her slumber. She opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day rushed back as she saw Isaac by the fireplace. "Good morning," he said, noting her movement. "How's your head feeling?" Lydia gingerly touched the wound, wincing slightly. "Tender, but better, I think. The room isn't spinning anymore." "That's good. Hungry." "Starving, actually," she admitted, carefully sitting up. His oversized shirt slipped off one shoulder and she quickly adjusted it, color rising in her cheeks. Isaac pretended not to notice her discomfort as he brought her a tin plate of food. "It's not fancy, but it'll keep your strength up." "Thank you." Lydia accepted the plate gratefully. "I must be a terrible inconvenience to you." Isaac shook his head. "Not at all. I couldn't very well leave you in that ravine." As they ate, Lydia told him about herself. She had been traveling from Boston to join her uncle, Harrison Crawford, who owned a mercantile in Keeler. After losing her parents to influenza the previous year, she had decided to make a fresh start in the West. "Uncle Harrison is my only remaining family," she explained. "He's been asking me to come west for years, but I always declined. After my parents died." She paused, her expression clouding. "Well, there was nothing keeping me in Boston anymore." Isaac nodded sympathetically. "Your uncle will be worried when the stage arrives without you." "Yes," Lydia said, her brow furrowing. "How far are we from Keeler?" "About 20 miles as the crow flies, but with these conditions." Isaac gestured toward the window where snow continued to fall steadily. "It could be several days before we can travel safely." Lydia set down her empty plate. "Mr. Turner, Isaac, I cannot express how grateful I am, but I cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely. My uncle will indeed be worried sick." "There's no question of you traveling today," Isaac said firmly. That head wound needs time to heal, and the pass will be treacherous after the fresh snow. As soon as it's safe, I'll take you to Keeler myself. Lydia wanted to argue but knew he was right. Her head throbbed despite the improvement, and the thought of facing the cold and snow made her shudder. Besides, Isaac continued with a small smile, I could use the company. Winters get lonely up here. Over the next 2 days, the storm continued to rage outside while Lydia recovered her strength inside the cozy cabin. She insisted on helping with chores, though Isaac was protective and wouldn't allow her to strain herself. They fell into a comfortable routine. Isaac would handle the outside tasks tending to thunder, checking his traps, bringing in firewood while Lydia kept the fire going and prepared simple meals from his stores. During the long hours confined by the weather, they talked. Isaac told Lydia about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about fighting in the Civil War with the Union Army, and about coming west afterward, unable to settle back into peaceful farm life after the horrors he had witnessed. I needed open spaces, he explained as they sat by the fire on the second evening. Somewhere I could breathe. Lydia understood more than he might have expected. After my parents died, our house in Boston felt like it was suffocating me, too many memories in every corner. Isaac nodded, poking at the fire. Is that why you finally accepted your uncle's invitation? Partly, Lydia admitted, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on her cup. There was also a broken engagement. Isaac raised an eyebrow but didn't press. His name was Edward, Lydia continued after a moment. A banker's son. It was a good match at least, that's what everyone said. When my parents fell ill, Edward distanced himself. Feared contagion, he claimed. After they died, he returned, but I saw him differently then. Coward, Isaac muttered. Lydia smiled sadly. Yes, though I wouldn't have used that word at the time. I just knew I couldn't marry a man who abandoned me when I needed him most. She took a sip of her tea. So here I am, starting fresh in the West. Though I hardly expected my new beginning to involve nearly dying in a ravine. Isaac chuckled. Life out here rarely goes as planned. That's part of its charm. By the third day, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white. The sun shone brightly, making the snow sparkle like countless diamonds. Lydia stood in the doorway of the cabin, wrapped in a blanket over her borrowed clothes, and marveled at the beauty. It's breathtaking, she said as Isaac joined her. That it is, he agreed, though his eyes weren't on the landscape but on her profile. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her dark hair, which she had washed with melted snow water the day before, caught the sunlight in rich brown waves. Lydia turned, catching his gaze. For a moment neither spoke, something unspoken passing between them. Isaac cleared his throat. If you're feeling up to it, we could try to make it to Keeler tomorrow. The main trail should be passable by then. Lydia felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Yes, of course. My uncle will be beside himself with worry. I need to check my traps one last time before we go. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours? Lydia nodded. I'll prepare provisions for our journey. After Isaac departed, Lydia busied herself with the tasks at hand, but her mind kept returning to the man who had saved her life. In just 3 days, she had come to admire his quiet strength, his self-sufficiency, his kindness. The thought of saying goodbye tomorrow left her with an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. Isaac, meanwhile, moved through the forest with practiced silence, checking his traps. He had caught a few rabbits and a fox, but his mind wasn't on his quarry. It was on the woman waiting in his cabin. Lydia Crawford was unlike anyone he had ever met, educated, refined, yet resilient and adaptable. The thought of delivering her to Keeler tomorrow and riding away filled him with an unfamiliar melancholy. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was beginning to set. Lydia had prepared a hearty stew from the last of his provisions, and the cabin smelled inviting. "Successful hunt?" she asked as he stamped the snow from his boots. "Reasonably," he replied, hanging up his coat. "We'll have fresh meat to trade in Keeler." They ate dinner together, their conversation more subdued than previous evenings. The impending separation hung over them like a cloud, though neither mentioned it directly. After dinner, Isaac retrieved a small wooden box from his trunk. "I've been saving this for a special occasion," he said, opening it to reveal a small amount of coffee, a luxury in these parts, especially during winter. Lydia's eyes widened. "Are you sure? That must be very precious." "What better time than now?" he said, already preparing to brew it. The rich aroma soon filled the cabin, and they savored the rare treat in companionable silence. When they had finished, Isaac hesitantly reached for his fiddle, which hung on the wall. "Would you mind?" he asked. "I usually play a bit in the evenings." "Please do," Lydia encouraged, settling back in her chair. Isaac began with a slow, melancholic tune that seemed to capture the vastness of the landscape outside. His eyes closed as he played, the music flowing from him as naturally as breath. Lydia watched, transfixed by the transformation. The reserved cowboy she had come to know over the past days was revealing another layer of himself through the music. When the last note faded, Lydia realized there were tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "What is it called?" "It doesn't have a name," Isaac admitted, setting the fiddle aside. "Just something I made up over the years. You're very talented." "Just something to pass the time during long winters," he said dismissively, though her compliment clearly pleased him. The fire crackled between them as silence descended once more. Tomorrow they would leave this small haven they had shared, returning to the wider world with all its complications and expectations. "Isaac," Lydia began hesitantly, "I want you to know how grateful I am. Not just for rescuing me, but for—" She gestured around the cabin, searching for the right words. These days have been special." Isaac met her gaze across the firelight. "They have been for me too, Lydia." The way he said her name, soft and reverent, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Perhaps," she continued, her heart racing, "perhaps when we reach Keeler, you might consider staying a while. I'm sure my uncle would want to thank you properly for saving me." A smile tugged at Isaac's lips. "I might just do that." Morning arrived with clear skies and slightly warmer temperatures, ideal conditions for their journey. Isaac packed efficiently while Lydia gathered the few belongings she had, her partially dried clothes and a small locket containing miniatures of her parents that had miraculously remained around her neck during her fall. "Ready?" Isaac asked as he finished saddling Thunder. Lydia nodded, though in truth she felt far from ready to leave the intimacy of the past few days behind. Isaac helped her onto the horse before mounting behind her. The closeness that had become familiar now felt charged with new awareness. Lydia was acutely conscious of his arms around her as he took the reins, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. They set out along the trail toward Keeler, moving carefully through the deep snow. The day was bright and clear, the mountain air crisp in their lungs. Under different circumstances, it would have been a glorious ride through spectacular scenery. "There's something I should tell you about Keeler," Isaac said after they had been traveling for about an hour. "It's changed since your uncle first wrote to you." Lydia turned slightly to look at him. "Changed how?" "The silver mines brought people at first. That's probably when your uncle established his mercantile. But the boom didn't last. The richest veins played out within a year or two. Some folks moved on to new strikes." Are you saying Keeler is a ghost town? Lydia asked, alarmed. Not quite, Isaac assured her. There are still people there. Your uncle's store might be doing just fine, especially if he diversified his goods. I haven't been there in a while, that's all. I just wanted you to be prepared. Lydia nodded slowly, turning back to face forward. Thank you for telling me. They continued their journey, stopping briefly at midday to rest Thunder and eat some of the provisions Lydia had prepared. The trail gradually descended from the mountains toward the valley, where Keeler was situated beside the vast, salty expanse of Owens Lake. As they approached the town in the late afternoon, Lydia could see what Isaac meant. Keeler was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with scattered homes and abandoned mining structures on the outskirts. Several buildings stood empty, their windows dark, but others showed signs of life, smoke rising from chimneys. A few horses hitched outside the saloon. Crawford Mercantile should be near the center of town, Isaac said, guiding Thunder down the main street. They passed a weathered church, a blacksmith shop, and the Keeler Hotel before spotting a large storefront with Crawford Mercantile and General Goods painted across the facade. Light glowed in the windows despite the closed sign on the door. Isaac helped Lydia dismount in front of the store. Her legs felt shaky after the long ride, and she leaned against him momentarily for support. The contact, brief as it was, reinforced her reluctance to part from him. Well, Isaac said, glancing at the store, I guess this is where I leave you. You won't stay? Lydia asked, unable to keep disappointment from her voice. Before Isaac could answer, the door of the mercantile burst open. A tall, gray-haired man with a full beard stood framed in the doorway, a lantern held high. Lydia, he called, disbelief evident in his voice. My God, is that you? Uncle Harrison, Lydia cried, moving toward him. The older man rushed forward, enveloping her in a crushing embrace. We thought you were dead. The stage arrived 3 days ago. They said you fell from the coach during the snowstorm. They searched but found no sign of you in the darkness. I would have died if not for Mr. Turner, Lydia said, turning to introduce Isaac. He saw the accident happen and climbed down into the ravine to rescue me. Harrison Crawford turned to Isaac, his eyes shining with gratitude. Sir, I cannot begin to thank you. You saved my only niece, my only family. Anyone would have done the same, Isaac said, uncomfortable with the praise. Nonsense, Harrison declared. Few men would risk their lives climbing down a ravine in a snowstorm. You must come inside. You'll stay for dinner at the very least. Isaac glanced at Lydia, who looked back at him with hopeful eyes. I suppose Thunder could use a proper stable for the night, he conceded. Harrison beamed. Excellent. There's room at the livery next door. Bring your horse around and I'll show Lydia inside. We have so much catching up to do. As Harrison led Lydia toward the store, she glanced back at Isaac, a silent promise in her eyes. This wasn't goodbye, not yet. The interior of Crawford Mercantile was warm and welcoming, the shelves well stocked with goods ranging from practical necessities to small luxuries. A pot-bellied stove radiated heat from the center of the room, and a counter ran along the back wall. A door beside the counter presumably led to living quarters. You've arrived at an interesting time, Harrison told Lydia as he helped her remove her cloak. Keeler isn't what it was when I first wrote to you, I'm afraid. The mines have mostly played out. Isaac mentioned that might be the case, Lydia said, warming her hands by the stove. Did he now? Harrison raised an eyebrow. Well, he's right, but I've adapted. The mercantile serves not just Keeler now, but the surrounding ranches and the Stagecoach line. We do a decent trade despite the changes. He studied her face more carefully. You're injured. What happened to your head? Lydia touched the healing wound, which was mostly hidden by her hair. From the fall, It's much better now, thanks to Isaac's care. Harrison's expression grew serious. You were alone with this man for several days. Lydia straightened, meeting her uncle's gaze directly. He saved my life and treated me with nothing but respect. I would have died without him. Harrison nodded slowly. Of course. Forgive me, my dear. It's just, well, you know how people talk. I don't particularly care how people talk, Lydia replied firmly. Isaac Turner is a good man. Before Harrison could respond, the bell above the door jangled as Isaac entered, stamping snow from his boots. Thunders settled at the livery, he announced. The stable boy seemed happy for the extra business. Harrison's demeanor changed instantly, warmth replacing concern. Excellent. Now let me show you both upstairs. I have rooms prepared. Lydia, I've kept a space ready for you since I received your letter. Mr. Turner, we can make up the small guest room. He led them through the door behind the counter into a comfortable living area. A staircase at the far end led to the second floor, where several doors opened off a narrow hallway. This will be your room, Lydia, Harrison said, opening the first door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a 4-poster bed and a small writing desk. I had Mrs. Thornton from down the street help me prepare it. I hope it's to your liking. It's perfect, Uncle, Lydia assured him, though after days in Isaac's rustic cabin, the room seemed almost excessively formal. And Mr. Turner, you'll be just across the hall, Harrison continued, opening another door. It's small but comfortable. Much obliged, Isaac said, setting down his saddlebags. And please call me Isaac. Very well, Isaac, I'll leave you both to freshen up. Dinner will be ready in about an hour. I'm not much of a cook, but I manage. After Harrison departed, Lydia and Isaac stood in the hallway, suddenly awkward in this new setting. This is quite a change from your cabin, Lydia said with a small smile. Indeed, Isaac agreed, glancing around the well-appointed hallway. Your uncle seems like a good man. He is. My father, his brother, always spoke highly of him, though they chose very different paths in life. They fell silent again, the ease of their interaction in the cabin temporarily lost in these new surroundings. I should. Lydia gestured toward her room. Of course, Isaac nodded. I'll see you at dinner. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Harrison doing most of the talking. He told Lydia about the town, its history, and the characters who populated it. He was clearly well respected in Keeler, serving not only as the proprietor of the mercantile, but also as an unofficial advisor to many in the community. Keeler may not be the boomtown it once was, he explained as they enjoyed a surprisingly good beef stew, but it's developing its own character. We have a doctor now, young fellow named Williams, came out west for his health, and Mrs. Thornton runs a small school for the children. It sounds lovely, Lydia said sincerely. And what about you, Isaac? Harrison turned his attention to their guest. Lydia mentioned you have a small ranch, Isaac nodded. About a day's ride north of here. Nothing fancy, some cattle, a vegetable garden, a couple of good horses besides Thunder. And you trap in winter for extra income? Yes, sir. The cabin where Lydia stayed is my trapping shelter. I head up into the mountains each winter for a few months. Harrison seemed to be taking Isaac's measure as they spoke, his questions probing but not unfriendly. By the end of the meal, some of the initial wariness had faded from the older man's eyes. Well, Harrison said as he stood to clear the plates, it's been a long day for both of you. Perhaps we should turn in early. Isaac, how long do you plan to stay in Keeler? Isaac glanced at Lydia before answering. I hadn't given it much thought. A day or two, perhaps, before heading back to check on my place. You're welcome to stay as long as you like, Harrison said generously. It's the least I can offer the man who saved my niece. Later, as Lydia prepared for bed in her new room, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Isaac standing in the hallway, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the confined space. "I wanted to say good night," he said quietly, "and to make sure you're feeling all right after the journey." "I'm fine," Lydia assured him, "just a bit overwhelmed. Everything has happened so quickly." Isaac nodded. "Your uncle seems pleased to have you here." "Yes, he's been very kind." Lydia hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said earlier about hoping you might stay in Keeler a while." "Did you now?" A small smile played at the corners of Isaac's mouth. "I did," Lydia confirmed, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "I would like the chance to know you better away from survival situations." Isaac's smile broadened. "I think that could be arranged. Good night, Lydia." "Good night, Isaac." As she closed the door, Lydia leaned against it, her heart beating faster than it should for a simple good-night exchange. She had known this man for only a few days, yet he had already become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The next morning, Lydia woke to the sounds of Keeler coming to life, wagon wheels on the packed dirt street, voices calling greetings, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. For a moment, she felt disoriented, the comfort of her bed a stark contrast to the rustic accommodations of Isaac's cabin. She dressed quickly in clothes Harrison had provided, simple but well-made garments that had belonged to a customer who ordered them but never returned to collect them. They fit reasonably well, though she would need to acquire more appropriate attire soon. Downstairs, she found Harrison already opened for business, attending to an elderly woman selecting spools of thread. "Ah, Lydia, come meet Mrs. Thornton," Harrison called when he spotted her. "She helped prepare your room." Mrs. Thornton proved to be a cheerful widow in her 60s who taught the local children in a small schoolhouse at the edge of town. "We're so pleased to have another young lady in Keeler," she told Lydia warmly, "especially one with Eastern education. Perhaps you might consider helping with the school sometimes. The children would benefit from your knowledge." "I would be happy to help," Lydia replied, genuinely touched by the welcome. As they chatted, Isaac entered the store from outside, his hair damp from washing and his face freshly shaved. He nodded politely to Mrs. Thornton before approaching Lydia. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in her new attire. "You look well." "Thank you," Lydia replied, suddenly conscious of Mrs. Thornton's interested gaze moving between them. "Did you sleep comfortably?" "Like a log," Isaac confirmed. "Your uncle has already been giving me a tour of the town this morning." "Has he?" Lydia glanced at Harrison, who shrugged innocently. "I thought our guest might appreciate seeing what Keeler has to offer," Harrison explained. "Isaac was kind enough to help me unload some heavy crates that arrived on yesterday's stage, so I offered him breakfast at the hotel in return." Mrs. Thornton, clearly bursting with curiosity about the handsome stranger who had arrived with Harrison's niece, made a transparent attempt to extend her shopping. "Perhaps Mr. Turner," Isaac supplied. "Mr. Turner might like to attend our church social next Sunday. We're a small congregation but very welcoming." Isaac glanced at Lydia before responding. "That's kind of you, madam. I may still be in town then." After Mrs. Thornton finally departed with her purchases and the promise to return with a fresh pie for dinner, Harrison turned to Lydia. "I thought you might like to see the town as well. Isaac has offered to escort you while I mind the store." "That would be lovely," Lydia agreed, trying not to appear too eager. The day was clear and relatively mild as Isaac and Lydia walked through Keeler. The town consisted primarily of one main street with a few side alleys, but Isaac took his time, pointing out buildings of interest and introducing Lydia to people they encountered. "Your uncle is well respected here," Isaac noted as they passed the bank, where the manager had greeted Lydia with particular deference. "He mentioned that he serves on the town council." He seems to have built a good life, Lydia agreed. I'm glad. My father always worried that Harrison was too restless for his own good. They reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to the vast expanse of Owens Lake, a strange, alien landscape of white salt flats and shallow water. It's beautiful in its way, Lydia remarked as they paused to observe a flock of birds feeding at the lake's edge. The whole valley is, Isaac agreed. That's why I stayed. There's something about this land that gets under your skin. Lydia studied his profile as he gazed out at the landscape. Will you return to your ranch soon? She asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Isaac turned to face her. I should check on things, make sure everything's in order after being away, but I could return to Keeler afterward, if there's reason to. The question in his statement was clear, hanging in the air between them. I would like it if you did, Lydia said softly. I owe you my life, Isaac, but it's more than gratitude that makes me wish for your return. Isaac took a step closer to her. And what is it besides gratitude? Lydia met his gaze steadily. In those few days at your cabin, I came to admire the man you are, your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I would like the opportunity to know that man better. A smile spread slowly across Isaac's face. Then I'll definitely be returning. Their walk back to the mercantile was filled with lighter conversation, a new understanding established between them. When they entered the store, they found Harrison engaged in animated discussion with a well-dressed man in his 40s. Ah, Lydia, Isaac, come meet Judge Harmon, Harrison called. He rides the circuit but calls Keeler home when court isn't in session. Judge Harmon greeted them cordially, though his eyes lingered appreciatively on Lydia longer than was entirely proper. Miss Crawford, your uncle has told me much about you. I'm pleased to see you've arrived safely, despite the unfortunate accident with the stage. Thank you, Your Honor, Lydia replied politely. Please call me William. We're quite informal in Keeler. The judge smiled warmly. I was just telling your uncle that we're having a small gathering at my home this Saturday evening. Nothing elaborate, just dinner and perhaps some music. I would be honored if you would attend as my special guest. Lydia hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. That's very kind of you. Isaac is invited as well, of course, the judge added, almost as an afterthought. Any friend of the Crawfords is welcome in my home. Thank you, Isaac said neutrally, though I may be heading back to my ranch by then. Lydia glanced at him in surprise. They had just discussed his return, not his departure. Well, the invitation stands if you're still in town, Judge Harmon said dismissively before turning his attention back to Lydia. I'll send my carriage for you at 7, shall I? Before Lydia could formulate a response, Harrison intervened. That's very generous, William, but I'm sure Lydia would prefer to walk with me, given that she's still recuperating from her ordeal. The judge looked disappointed but nodded. Of course. I'll expect you both at 7 then, and Mr. Turner if you're still in Keeler. With a tip of his hat, he departed. An awkward silence fell after the judge's exit. Isaac's expression had grown guarded, reminding Lydia of when she had first awakened in his cabin. Well, Harrison said brightly, seemingly oblivious to the tension. That's quite an honor, Lydia. William Harmon is the most eligible bachelor in Keeler, a Harvard man, no less. Is he indeed? Lydia replied noncommittally, her eyes on Isaac. I should check on Thunder, Isaac said abruptly. Make sure he's being properly cared for at the livery. Before Lydia could protest, he had left the store, the bell jangling in his wake. Did I say something wrong? Harrison asked, puzzled. Lydia sighed. I think Judge Harmon's interest was rather obvious, Uncle, and perhaps not welcome. Harrison's eyebrows rose. Surely you're not referring to Isaac Turner? Lydia, he's a fine man and I'm grateful for what he did, but the judge is a much more suitable match for someone of your background." "My background?" Lydia echoed incredulously. "Uncle, I came west to escape exactly that kind of thinking. I will decide for myself who is or isn't suitable." Harrison held up his hands in surrender. "Of course, my dear, I just want what's best for you." "Then please trust me to know my own heart," Lydia said firmly. That evening, Isaac didn't join them for dinner, sending word that he had business at the livery. Lydia ate in distracted silence while Harrison chatted about town matters, her mind on the abrupt change in Isaac's demeanor after the judge's visit. After dinner, she went in search of him, finding him at last in the small stable behind the livery where Thunder was housed. He was brushing the horse methodically, his back to the door. "I missed you at dinner," Lydia said softly. Isaac turned, his expression guarded. "I had things to attend to." "Things that couldn't wait until after we'd eaten," Isaac sighed, setting the brush aside. "I thought it best to give you and your uncle space to discuss Judge Harmon's dinner invitation." Lydia moved closer, stopping just arm's length from him. "Is that what this is about, the judge? He seems a fine man, educated, successful, the kind of man a Boston lady might appreciate." "And you think I care about those things?" Lydia asked, her voice rising slightly. "After everything we've been through together?" Isaac ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Lydia, men like Judge Harmon can offer you a life I never could. A proper house in town, social standing, security." "I didn't come west looking for social standing," Lydia retorted. "I came for a fresh start, away from people who measured worth by pedigree and bank accounts." "Your uncle seemed pleased about the judge's interest," Isaac observed. "My uncle doesn't know me as well as he thinks he does," Lydia countered. "I value courage, kindness, and honesty far more than Harvard degrees or fine houses." A hint of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "Do you now?" "I do." Lydia took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "The man who risked his life to save a stranger means far more to me than the man who sent his carriage so I wouldn't have to walk." Isaac's expression softened. "You're a remarkable woman, Lydia Crawford." "And you're a frustrating man, Isaac Turner, if you think I'd be swayed by a judge's attention when I've already given my heart elsewhere." Her bold declaration hung in the air between them. For a moment, Isaac seemed stunned. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out to touch her cheek. "Have you indeed?" he asked, his voice low. "I have," Lydia confirmed, her heart racing. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if the recipient values the gift." In answer, Isaac drew her gently toward him. "He values it above all things," he murmured before lowering his lips to hers. The kiss was tender at first, a question more than a demand. When Lydia responded, lifting her arms to encircle his neck, Isaac deepened the kiss, one hand cradling the back of her head with exquisite care, mindful of her healing wound. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to your uncle," Lydia smiled. "Yes, you should, but not about Judge Harmon's dinner party." Isaac chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her. "No, about something far more important." The following morning, Lydia woke early, anticipation fluttering in her stomach. She and Isaac had agreed he would speak with Harrison before the store opened for business. She dressed with particular care, selecting the nicest of the garments Harrison had provided. When she descended to the living quarters behind the store, she found Harrison already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before him and a thoughtful expression on his face. "Good morning, Uncle," Lydia greeted him cautiously. Harrison looked up, studying her face for a long moment before speaking. "Isaac Turner came to see me at sunrise." "Did he?" Lydia tried to sound casual as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "He did." Harrison took a sip from his cup. Interesting man, your Mr. Turner. Not what I expected when I first saw him. Lydia sat across from her uncle. What did he say to you? He said that he had developed feelings for you during your time together, that he would like my blessing to court you properly. Harrison set down his cup. He also said that regardless of my answer, he intended to pursue you if you were willing, but that he hoped for my approval out of respect for family. And what did you tell him? Lydia asked, her heart racing. Harrison sighed. I told him that my niece appears to have inherited the Crawford stubborn streak, and that if she had set her heart on him, my opinion would matter little. Uncle. Harrison held up a hand. I also told him that any man willing to risk his life to save my niece, and then face me at dawn to declare his intentions, was worthy of consideration. Relief flooded through Lydia. Then you approve? I'm reserving judgment, Harrison replied, though his stern expression was belied by the twinkle in his eye. But I gave him permission to call on you, with the understanding that I expect him to proceed honorably. Of course he will, Lydia said indignantly. Isaac is the most honorable man I've ever met. Harrison nodded slowly. Yes, I believe he is, which is why I suggested he might want to settle closer to Keeler if his intentions toward you are serious. You did? Lydia was surprised. What did he say to that? He said he'd been considering it already. There's a small ranch on the western edge of the valley that's for sale. Previous owner died last winter, and his widow is returning east to live with her daughter. Lydia's heart leaped at the thought of Isaac establishing himself near Keeler. Did he seem interested? He's riding out to look at the property this morning. Harrison's expression grew serious. Lydia, I want you to be certain. You've known this man for a very short time under extraordinary circumstances. Such situations can create intense feelings that might not endure in everyday life. I understand your concern, Uncle, Lydia said, reaching across the table to take his hand. But I've spent my entire life making cautious, practical decisions. My engagement to Edward was one of those safe, approved, proper. With Isaac, I feel. She paused, searching for words. I feel truly alive. I feel seen for who I really am. Harrison squeezed her hand. Then I wish you both happiness, my dear, though I expect a proper courtship, mind you. No rushing into anything. Of course, Lydia agreed, though privately she thought that after facing death together in a mountain ravine, conventional courtship rituals seemed somewhat redundant. Isaac returned late that afternoon, dust-covered but clearly pleased with what he had seen. The ranch needs work, he told Lydia as they walked along Keeler's Main Street, but the land is good, with a year-round creek and enough grazing for twice the cattle I currently own. And the house? Lydia inquired, trying not to sound too eager. Isaac's eyes crinkled at the corners. Small but solid. 2 bedrooms, a decent-sized kitchen. Nothing fancy, but it could be made comfortable with the right touch. It sounds perfect, Lydia said sincerely. I made an offer, Isaac admitted. Mrs. Peterson seemed relieved to have a serious buyer. She wants to leave before spring. Lydia's heart skipped. Then you'll be staying in Keeler, not just staying, Isaac corrected, stopping to face her. Making a home here if that's what you want too. It is, Lydia confirmed without hesitation. More than anything. Isaac took her hands in his. Your uncle insists on a proper courtship. He mentioned at least 6 months before we could consider marriage. Lydia laughed. He told me the same thing this morning. I believe it's negotiable, however, especially if you continue to impress him with your responsible nature and business acumen. I'll do my best, Isaac promised with a grin. Though I should warn you I'll need to return to my current ranch to settle affairs there. I'll be gone for a few weeks at least. The thought of his departure, even temporary, dimmed Lydia's happiness. When will you leave? In a few days. Once the sale of the Peterson place is finalized, I'll need to bring my cattle and belongings before the mountain passes become difficult again." Lydia nodded, understanding the practical necessity but dreading their separation nonetheless. "Promise me you'll be careful. No more rescuing damsels from ravines while you're away." Isaac laughed, drawing her closer. "I promise. That's a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Isaac finalized the purchase of the Peterson ranch, paying a fair price that satisfied both parties. Harrison, seeing Isaac's commitment, began to warm to the match, especially when Isaac displayed an aptitude for business in his negotiations. Judge Harmon's dinner party arrived, and despite Lydia's reluctance, both she and Isaac attended, along with Harrison. The judge's disappointment at Lydia's obvious attachment to Isaac was poorly disguised, but he remained cordial throughout the evening. The other guests, Keeler's doctor, the bank manager and his wife, and the widow who ran the hotel, welcomed Lydia warmly to the community. All too soon, the morning of Isaac's departure arrived. He had packed his few belongings and made arrangements to return with a small cattle drive within a month. Lydia stood beside Thunder as Isaac made his final preparations. "A month isn't so very long," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. "It will pass quickly," Isaac agreed, though his expression suggested he found the prospect of separation as difficult as she did. "I've asked your uncle to escort you to the Peterson place occasionally so you can see what you think about changes to the house." Lydia smiled at his thoughtfulness. "I'll make lists of everything we'll need." Isaac mounted Thunder, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart ache. "I'll come back to you, Lydia. That's a promise." "I know you will," she replied, reaching up to squeeze his hand one last time. "Be safe, Isaac." With a final nod to Harrison, who stood in the doorway of the mercantile, Isaac turned Thunder toward the trail leading north from Keeler. Lydia watched until horse and rider disappeared from view, already counting the days until his return. The weeks of Isaac's absence proved both challenging and rewarding for Lydia. She threw herself into learning the operations of her uncle's mercantile, displaying a keen mind for business that impressed Harrison. She also began helping Mrs. Thornton at the schoolhouse 2 afternoons each week, teaching the older children reading and mathematics. True to his word, Harrison escorted her to the Peterson ranch several times to plan improvements to the house. Lydia found herself falling in love with the small homestead, envisioning curtains at the windows, a vegetable garden beside the kitchen, and perhaps someday, children's laughter filling the rooms. Letters arrived from Isaac weekly, carried by the stage drivers who knew him. He wrote of his progress, the sale of his previous ranch, the preparations for moving his cattle, his eagerness to return to Keeler and to her. Lydia treasured each letter, reading them repeatedly until the paper grew soft from handling. "You've brought life back to this old house," Harrison remarked one evening as they sat by the fire after closing the store. "I didn't realize how lonely I'd become until you arrived." Lydia smiled at her uncle. "I'm glad I came west, even with the dramatic entrance." Harrison chuckled. "Yes, falling into a ravine was an unconventional way to begin your new life, though it did introduce you to your Isaac." "My Isaac," Lydia repeated softly, liking the sound of it. "Do you truly approve, Uncle? You've seemed more accepting lately." Harrison considered his answer carefully. "I've watched you these past weeks, Lydia. You're happier, more confident, more yourself than I suspect you ever were in Boston. If Isaac Turner is responsible for bringing out this version of my niece, then yes, I approve heartily." 4 weeks to the day after Isaac's departure, Lydia was arranging a display of fabric in the mercantile's front window when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking up, She saw a small herd of cattle being driven down Keeler's Main Street, led by a familiar figure on a black horse. "Uncle," she called excitedly. "Isaac's back." She didn't wait for Harrison's response before rushing outside, heedless of the dust raised by the cattle. Isaac spotted her immediately, his face breaking into a broad smile as he guided Thunder toward the mercantile. He swung down from the saddle just as Lydia reached him. "You're early," she said breathlessly as he caught her hands in his. "I couldn't stay away any longer," Isaac admitted, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. "We traveled hard the last few days." Harrison emerged from the store, watching their reunion with a benevolent expression. "Welcome back, Isaac. Successful journey, I see." Isaac nodded, reluctantly releasing one of Lydia's hands to shake Harrison's. "Very successful, sir. I sold my previous property for a good price and brought 20 head of cattle to start the new ranch." "Excellent," Harrison approved. "You must be exhausted. Come inside once you've settled your herd." "Thank you," Isaac replied. "My drovers will take the cattle to the Peterson to my ranch. I'll join them after I've spoken with you and Lydia." An hour later, Isaac sat at the kitchen table in the living quarters behind the mercantile, clean and refreshed after washing away the dust of the trail. Lydia couldn't stop smiling as she served coffee, her joy at his return apparent to all. "I have something to discuss with both of you," Isaac said after taking a grateful sip of his coffee. "Something important." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I hope you're not about to tell us you've changed your mind about settling in Keeler." "Quite the opposite," Isaac assured him. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I visited San Francisco before returning. Among other business, I acquired this." He appended the pouch, and a ring fell into his palm, a delicate gold band with a small but perfect diamond. Lydia's breath caught as Isaac turned to her. "I know we agreed to a proper courtship," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "but I've had a great deal of time to think during my travels. Life is unpredictable and often short, as we both know too well. I don't want to waste a moment of the time we might have together." He moved from his chair to one knee before her, holding out the ring. "Lydia Crawford, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Lydia's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to Isaac's earnest face. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, with all my heart." Isaac slid the ring onto her finger before rising to embrace her, his kiss conveying all the longing of their separation. A throat clearing from Harrison reminded them they weren't alone. "I believe I stipulated 6 months," he said dryly, though his eyes twinkled. Isaac turned to face him, keeping one arm around Lydia's waist. "Sir, I respect your wishes, but I love your niece more than I can express. I've prepared a good home for her, and I'll spend my life ensuring her happiness. I'm asking for your blessing to marry her before winter sets in." Harrison studied them both for a long moment before sighing in defeat. "How can I argue with that? You have my blessing, though I insist on at least a month's engagement for propriety's sake." "A month," Lydia agreed, beaming at her uncle. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Harrison grumbled good-naturedly. "I've simply learned when I'm outnumbered. Now, Isaac, tell us about the improvements you've made to the ranch while you've been planning to undermine my authority." The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Keeler, with most residents expressing genuine pleasure at the match. Judge Harmon maintained a dignified disappointment, but sent a handsome silver tea service as an engagement gift. Lydia divided her time between helping at the mercantile, preparing for the wedding, and visiting the ranch where she would soon live as Isaac's wife. Isaac had hired local men to help with improvements to the house, a new roof, fresh paint, expanded kitchen gardens. Each visit revealed new changes, all made with Lydia's comfort in mind. "It's coming along nicely," Isaac said as they stood on the porch one golden afternoon in late October. The aspens on the hillsides had turned brilliant yellow, contrasting with the deep green of the pines. "Though there's still much to do." "It's perfect," Lydia assured him, leaning against his side as they surveyed the small ranch. The cattle grazed peacefully in the meadow below, the creek sparkled in the autumn sunlight, and the mountains rose majestically in the distance. "I can't wait to make it our home." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "One more week." The wedding took place in Keeler's small church on the first Saturday of November. The entire town seemed to attend, filling the simple wooden structure to capacity. Mrs. Thornton had organized the schoolchildren to decorate with autumn flowers and ribbons, transforming the plain interior into a festive space. Lydia wore a dove-gray silk dress that Harrison had specially ordered from San Francisco, with a lace collar and cuffs that had belonged to her mother. As she walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, her eyes fixed on Isaac waiting at the altar, she felt a profound sense of rightness, as though her entire life had been leading to this moment. Isaac, dressed in a new black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, watched her approach with undisguised adoration. When Harrison placed Lydia's hand in his, Isaac squeezed it gently, a silent promise passing between them. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple gold bands and traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the hushed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Lydia with restrained tenderness, mindful of their audience but unable to completely hide the depth of his feelings. The celebration afterward, held in the town square, lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household in Keeler. A fiddler and guitarist provided music for dancing, and even the most reserved townspeople joined in the festivities. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Isaac and Lydia slipped away from the celebration, mounting horses decorated with ribbons and flowers by the schoolchildren. They rode toward their ranch, their home, accompanied by cheers and well wishes from the townsfolk. "Are you happy, Mrs. Turner?" Isaac asked as they rode side by side along the familiar trail. Lydia looked at her husband, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Isaac reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I never thought I'd have this: a wife, a home, a future worth building. When I saw that stagecoach go over the edge that day, I had no idea I was riding toward everything I'd ever wanted. It seems impossible that something so wonderful could come from such a terrible accident," Lydia agreed. "But I'm grateful every day that you found me in that ravine." They reached the ranch as twilight deepened into night. Isaac helped Lydia dismount before leading the horses to the small barn. When he returned, he swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their home. Inside, the cabin glowed with warm light from lamps that Harrison had arranged to have lit in anticipation of their arrival. A fire crackled in the hearth, taking the chill from the November air. On the table stood a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, another of Harrison's thoughtful gestures. Isaac set Lydia gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, my love." Lydia raised her face for his kiss, her heart overflowing with joy. "Home," she repeated against his lips. "Our home." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Lydia rested her head on Isaac's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "I love you, Isaac Turner," Lydia murmured, sleep beginning to claim her. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Lydia Turner, more than I have words to say." As winter settled over the valley, the Turner Ranch became a haven of warmth and happiness. Isaac's cattle thrived in the sheltered pastures, and the house grew more comfortable with each passing week as Lydia added her touch to every room. They established routines and traditions, learning the rhythms of married life with joy and occasional humorous missteps. Harrison was a frequent visitor, riding out from Keeler whenever the weather permitted. He took obvious pleasure in seeing his niece so content, and a genuine friendship developed between him and Isaac. "You've done well here," Harrison remarked to Isaac on a clear December day as they stood surveying the ranch. "Better than I expected, I'll admit." Isaac smiled, watching Lydia through the kitchen window as she prepared dinner. "I have every reason to succeed now." When the first major snowstorm of the season blanketed the valley in white, Isaac and Lydia stood on their porch after securing the livestock, arms wrapped around each other as they watched the falling snow. "Reminds me of when we met," Isaac said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Lydia nodded, thinking of the ravine, the desperate climb, the small cabin where they had first come to know each other. "I never thought I'd be grateful for a stagecoach accident, but I am, every day." Isaac turned her in his arms to face him. "I was thinking, what would you say to a trip to San Francisco in the spring? We could visit the shops, maybe take in some theater, a proper honeymoon." Lydia's eyes lit up at the prospect. "I'd love that, though." She hesitated, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. "We might need to plan for 3. Isaac's brow furrowed in confusion before comprehension dawned. "Are you saying?" Lydia nodded, her eyes shining with happy tears. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in early summer." Isaac's whoop of joy echoed across the snowy landscape as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a careful circle before setting her gently down. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, placing his hand reverently over her still flat stomach. "Our child." "Our child," Lydia confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "The first of many, I hope." Isaac kissed her then in the falling snow with all the love and gratitude in his heart. From disaster had come the greatest blessing of his life, this woman, their home, and now their growing family. As they turned to go inside, arm in arm, Lydia paused for one last look at the snow-covered mountains where their story had begun. "Thank you," she whispered to the wilderness that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her everything. Isaac squeezed her hand, understanding without words. Together, they stepped into the warmth of their home, closing the door on the winter night and opening the next chapter of their life together. 5 years later, on a warm summer evening, Isaac and Lydia sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard. 3-year-old Harrison chased his 5-year-old sister Elizabeth with shrieks of laughter while baby James slept peacefully in Lydia's arms. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. Isaac's cattle herd now numbered over 100, and they had added sheep the previous year. The house had grown with their family, 2 new bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and the porch where they now sat enjoying the sunset. "I got a letter from Mrs. Thornton today," Lydia said, adjusting the sleeping baby. "She's finally retiring from teaching. She suggested I might consider taking over the school." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Would you want to, with 3 little ones?" "Not immediately," Lydia admitted. "But perhaps in a few years when James is older. I enjoyed helping with the older children before Elizabeth was born." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "You'd make a wonderful teacher, and the ride to town isn't far." Their conversation was interrupted by Elizabeth running up the porch steps, her dark hair so like her mother's escaping from its braids. "Papa, Harrison says there's a mountain lion in the barn. There isn't really, is there?" Isaac smiled, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "No, sweetheart." Harrison is teasing you. The only animals in our barn are horses, cattle, and maybe a few mice." "I told him you'd say that," Elizabeth declared triumphantly. She wiggled free to run back to her brother, shouting, "Papa says you're a fibber, Harrison Turner." Lydia and Isaac exchanged amused glances as Harrison protested his innocence. "They remind me of us sometimes," Isaac remarked. "Elizabeth with her certainty, Harrison with his imagination." "And James with your calm strength," Lydia added, looking down at their sleeping youngest. "We've been blessed, haven't we?" Isaac reached over to take her free hand, running his thumb over the wedding ring that hadn't left her finger in 5 years. "Beyond measure." As the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold reminiscent of their wedding day, Isaac and Lydia called their children to come inside. The family gathered around the dinner table, a ritual repeated daily but never taken for granted. Later, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Isaac and Lydia stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the moonlit valley. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone?" Lydia asked, leaning back against her husband's chest. "If the stagecoach hadn't crashed that day, if you hadn't seen it happen." Isaac wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I look at our children, at everything we've built together, and I can only be grateful for whatever twist of fate brought you into my life." Lydia turned in his embrace to face him, her expression serious. "It wasn't just fate, Isaac. It was your courage, your willingness to risk yourself for a stranger. You climbed down that ravine not knowing what you'd find. And found everything I never knew I wanted," Isaac finished, lowering his lips to hers in a kiss as tender as their first, yet deepened by years of shared life and love. Outside, the stars shone bright over the Turner Ranch, a testament to how the darkest moments sometimes led to the greatest light. How a desperate rescue in a snowy ravine had become the first chapter of a story still being written, day by day, in love.